Hey, I want to welcome everybody to this leadership lessons discussion. And I'm so happy that today we've got Hugh Coppen with us, all the way from San Francisco. I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to this next few minutes together, Hugh, because you and I do go back a few years now, and you're such an interesting guy. So thanks for being here. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks for the opportunity, John. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm going to keep it as tight as I possibly can. But I wanted to mention, well, number one, you're the founder and CEO of Tasimba. And, for those who don't know, Tasimba is an organization that leads individuals, CEOs, executives, groups of people on deeply immersive, and I would say life-changing safari in a vast private wilderness teeming with wildlife, and in your home country in Zimbabwe.
That's our home base, yeah, because that's where we found the best combination of criteria that we wanted to meet with when we started Tasimba.
But unforgettable, life-changing experiences, and we're going to talk about that, a little bit further. But the other thing I want people to know is you have worked with CEOs and executives all over the world. I mean, that's the other thing you do when you're not doing your Tasimba. You're helping other people succeed.
Yeah. It's two sides of the same coin for me, John. Both of them are giving people the opportunity to be the very best they can be, and to expose them and create opportunities for them to see themselves in a new light and in a new way of leadership.
Yeah, 100%. And the other thing I want to mention is you have been the CEO, the president of a number of companies. I'm not going to list them here. People can go to your LinkedIn profile and see what you've done. But you've run private companies, you've run public companies. You've seen a lot in your career and been very successful in your career. I also want to mention that you are a director with the Alliance of Chief Executives there in San Francisco, right there in Silicon Valley, right? And you're also a mentor with CEO Global Network, and we're awfully glad you are. And the last thing I really want to mention is, and you love Africa.
That's true.
What's the number one thing you've learned from the African wild?
John, I mean, for me, the way I start with that question is with, of all people, Albert Einstein, because he said, look deep into nature and then you will understand everything better. And so that's really the number one takeaway, is that nature has and is an incredible learning lab for us. It's our greatest teacher. It is where we can watch and observe and learn so much about ourselves. And that learning never stops, as it doesn't, as you and I know, in business as well. Business leaders need to go on learning. And so we do when we go into the bush, because there's something new every day that's happening. You look at the wildlife guides, they're the most excited people in the early morning to be going out. They do it all their life, every single day, but they can't wait to get out there because there's something new may have happened. There's something new we will find. So it is just really, the takeaway is that we are learning from nature every single day. I can't think of a safari that I've been on where I didn't learn something. And it may be something as simple as just reminding ourselves that every animal has a purpose. And that purpose, theirs is fairly simple: survival of themselves and survival of the species. And those two things drive everything they do. We manage to complicate our purpose in that, but it's being in the bush allows us to rediscover what's really important to us and to redefine what's our purpose in life. So we spend a lot of time really allowing the things to sink in, to get that deep immersion, so that people start looking at themselves that way.
Yeah, and things have to quieten down. Hugh, is that what you're saying? I mean, when you're in the bush, things slow down, don't they? And things are quiet.
You stop, you watch, you listen, and then you learn. And it's doing that and being patient to let that all happen, rather than rushing from one thing to the next in the hope you'll see something else that's new. But watch this for a while.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. Appreciate that. Yeah, the next question for you is, if there was one moment, one memory that captures the essence for you of really time in the African wild, which one would it be?
Oh gosh,
very tough. That's a tough one.
Depends which day you ask me. Because there are so many, John. But look, the most important part about it is that since no two safaris are the same, there's always those sorts of things happening. For example, I have a beautiful, evocative shot of two women who are sitting with their feet in the little pool. And the pool is only 20 feet long in camp on one blisteringly hot day. And we've been watching the elephants going by to the water hole. And this one family came right to the pool, and a family about 10 elephants. And these two women sat there 20 feet away from these gentle giants who are now slaking their thirst out of the pool water, and they are this close to them, and these elephants are huge in their images. So I mean, that's one of those moments that they will never forget ever, and will always be part of theirs. But for everybody who watched it, you say, what a magical moment that was. Or when you're driving, as I have done so many times, and you find lions by the edge of the track. I mean, until you've sat right next to him, big male lion, and he's looking up at you with those big amber eyes, and he looks as though he's looking right through you, and you're looking into those eyes. That's a very, very special connection, an extraordinary mind-searing memory that you'll always have of that. Or when you're out on a walk in the bush, and you stand behind a fallen tree, and you're watching a bull elephant just slowly work his way around and in the trees. And then he walks right by, just on the other side of the tree that you're standing behind. He's maybe 6, 8 feet from you. And he walks quietly by, just ignores you completely. And I'll tell you the rest of that anecdote. One of the guests said, he didn't even know we were here, to the guide. And the guide said, he knew. But it's those sorts of moments that you remember, and that they sear themselves into your memory. Or even it's hours at the waterhole. You sit in a vehicle watching a busy waterhole at the end of the dry season, and the waterhole is like Penn Central Station. I mean, it's where everything is coming to the waterhole. The elephants are there, buffalo come by, all the other animals come by, and you're sitting watching this magical play out of wildlife doing their thing, and the interrelationships between them. When two elephants who aren't of the same family but meet each other again, and you see them intertwine their trunks as their gesture of friendship. These things are the memories that happen every day. And so I didn't answer your question, which one? Because I can't give you one.
Well, you know, there's certainly a theme there, Hugh.
Yeah.
And the theme is the magic of the wild and the animals that are there. I mean, I guess the memory is around being so close to them and kind of just sharing their world.
Exactly, John. That's exactly it. It's having the privilege to be in their space, their world, and quietly just observing and learning and watching from that.
Yeah, there's a spiritual dimension to it. You and I have talked about it before. There is a spiritual dimension to being there, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
In their space.
Absolutely. Yeah, the Cathedral of the Wild.
The Cathedral of the Wild. It looks like you've got a nice memory over your left shoulder there.
I do.
With those giraffes.
Yeah, giraffes at sunset. Yeah. And I mean, look, every sunset is magnificent in Africa, as you know, John. But every year and every time you get a different one. On this last trip 2 months ago, I got a magnificent shot of two elephants swimming across the Zambezi River with their trunks raised up like that at sunset. I mean, it's one of those shots you say, okay, how did you get that posed?
Yeah, for anyone into photography, nature photography, my goodness gracious. Yeah. But it does take a twist, doesn't it? Because it starts to, you're looking out through that camera, and then all of a sudden you're looking inward, right?
Yes, exactly, John.
Yeah,
no very much so.
Hugh, I wanted to ask you, so we're really zeroing in on inspiration, aren't we? There's something very inspirational.
Yeah, there really is, John, because as in our lives, there are inflection points that happen in our lives. Inflection points being things that are really wonderful that happen, or things that can be very traumatic, very, very sad that happen, but they change our perspective on things. And a safari is one of those inflection points, because the inspiration that you get is when you see things in a different way that causes you to think or act differently. You see things through a new light that then causes you to think or act differently. For example, one of the things that first happens for so many people is, even from the drive from the airstrip into camp, the first moment they're out in the wilderness with us, it's about a 90-minute drive. But one guest arrived, and I saw him get off the vehicle in camp, and he's got tears streaming down his face. And I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "That space is just so incredibly peaceful and magical and amazing. I've never seen such a big sky or such a big horizon. I've never seen and been so moved by that space. We've got to preserve space like that, because God knows we're using it all up as human beings. So, there's that. The other part too, John, is that the whole disconnection, when you get there and get to camp and you are disconnected from everything that's going on in the outside world, you are there and literally you are in the moment, in the place, and you are there now. And so for that also becomes very clarifying, because people stop thinking about what's going on back home or what's going on in the world, and they're experiencing this whole safari life in a way that is becomes very meaningful to them. And look, when you're spending 15 hours a day outside, which most of us, spend the opposite. We spend 15 hours a day or more inside, and then we go to sleep. I mean, when you spend 15 hours a day outside, you're getting, again, a different view of yourself and of life and of time and of the most important things in life. So, it's all of those things put together, I think, John, that create that inspiration, and you learn from the experiences of others. We all were sitting in the same vehicle watching the same thing, and you sit around the campfire that night and people are talking about it, and you say, wow, they had a different experience than I did of that. That's really interesting. So again, it broadens your own perception of what it is that's going on. And it gives you this notion that the way I see it isn't necessarily the only way that something is.
Thank you, Hugh, for that. I'm coming off mute because I have a wild animal here that's greeting an Amazon delivery. Okay, so I apologize for that. This guy is still going in the background, but we'll just forge ahead. Let's take a deeper look at leadership. Okay, what is it, Hugh, that helps leaders become better leaders by being in the African wilderness? What are some of those leadership lessons that can help them come back into their into their role as a CEO and be a better leader?
One of the most fundamental of them, John, was one of the basic principles that we had in mind when we started Tasimba, and that was, we want to take leaders out of their comfort zone and put them into a new environment in which they are not the expert, in which they don't know everything, in which that is all new for them. Because that's when people start to learn more, is because their mind becomes open to the possibility, gosh, I don't know everything after all. And so it's a huge part of it is moving people outside of their comfort zone, so that they then recognize there's a lot I don't know. That's good for them, because it's good for all of us to go on realizing have to go on learning in our lives in order to continue growing. Number two, I think, is humility. I talked about that vast space. I talked about the size of the elephants. One of the first things that happens to a lot of people is they start to realize just how small we are and how insignificant we are. And it's very humbling and very, very good for us. Here's another thing that I think that leaders get out of it as well. Learning how to trust somebody else. They come out of their comfort zone where they are essentially the go-to person in their company or in their organization or in their role or whatever. And they are suddenly in the charge of a guy they've never seen before, who's called the wildlife guide. And this guy is responsible now for their safety, for their life, for their learning, for everything like that. And they have to learn right out of the gate. This guy knows so much about what he's doing, I can trust him. That, again, it's another part of the sort of the evolution for leaders. Vulnerability is something we often talk about as being, well, that's a leadership weakness. I happen to disagree with that. I happen to think that being able to be vulnerable and knowing and recognizing your vulnerability is really critical. Well, there's no time that you feel more vulnerable than when you're out on a walk, out of camp, away from the vehicle. Now you're walking in the path where you can see the tracks of wildlife were there last night or this morning. There's a sense of vulnerability to that. That creates an incredible sense of awareness, our sensory awareness, 360 awareness around ourselves, and seeing ourselves through a different lens, seeing and looking at ourselves in a completely different way. And perhaps the last, but just equal, I mean, there's several others, but one of the other ones, which is so important, is learning to listen. And listening is one of the most critical assets, critical qualities that you have in the wild, because listening is what the animals do. They do more listening than they do talking. And unlike us, we go on talking instead of listening. But listening is so critical. And so one of the things we do actually, in order to help people really understand the value of that, is we will say at the start of a drive, okay, this is a silent drive for the next half hour. And the guide will stop, but still say nothing. Because what we want you to do is to listen or see or find out, why did he stop? What's happening here? So that your awareness picks up, but so that you start to use these as eyes as well as these.
The thing is too, you only learn when you're in an uncomfortable position, eh? When you're in an uncomfortable situation. And
Right.
it is an uncomfortable situation, isn't it? As you say, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
you're not in control there, right?
Exactly. And but it's good for us as
Good
leaders
for us, yeah.
it really is. And it's wonderful to see people, in that space where they're out, and there's anxiety even for leaders to start with. And then they start to understand more, but then they also start to ask more questions, and asking more questions of the guide, and more, as you know, and I know, whether it's in business or whether it's in life, the more questions you ask, the more you learn. And that's, so that again, it's part of that cycle of learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. I have one more question for you, Hugh. I could ask you 100 more questions about this, but we respect your time here. But my last question is, I've heard you talk about, keystone leadership. And, you know, uh, I don't know a lot about that. I'd like to know more about that. And I'd like to know more about what that has to do with Africa and being in the wild.
Okay, thanks, John. It's as you know, I kind of like talking about Africa myself, so I don't mind any questions at all.
Yeah.
Keystone leadership. Let's start with the notion of what is the keystone. In the old days, before mortar and that, the keystone was that wedge-shaped stone in the top of a natural archway, even when there was no mortar. And the pressure of that stone keeps all of the other stones, keeps the whole archway in place. So the keystone is what keeps the archway alive and standing. In nature, there are certain species that are keystone species. And this is the definition, because they create beneficial outcome for others in their same ecosystem. Let me give you an example, the best example in the world, bees. Classic keystone species, because they create such huge beneficial outcome all across the world in terms of agriculture and pollination and so on. But there are others, and the classic one that we use in Africa is elephants. Elephants do so many things which make them a keystone. They create the pathways to water. They're the ones who stop the forest from encroaching on the grasslands. They have such an inefficient digestive system that what goes in the front door, 70% of the nutritional value goes right out the back door. But that in itself creates a huge dependency of other species on this pile of manure that comes out with seeds in it and so on, which can plant new trees or plant new bushes, but at the same time gets to be what other species, birds and baboons and others, pick through that, looking for these nicely, freshly germinated seeds. So elephants in every way are the keystone species of Africa. Well, then you say, well, look at us. Are we humans? Are we a keystone species? And then if you put us into the definition, well, tell me which other species gets a beneficial outcome from us being here? There isn't one. I mean, people say, well, my dog. Look, your dog would soon become feral. And your cat, it already is.
Already.
So the point is that nothing depends on us. There's no other species that is dependent on us for its beneficial outcome, for its survival, for its existence. However, because we're not a keystone species doesn't mean we can't become keystone leaders. And that is leaders who act with that same degree of benefit to others that keystone species exist in the wild. So for example, it's keystone leaders who create an impact. And the impact they create is by creating and doing things which are of benefit to others around them. So it becomes very much related to servant leadership, in terms of doing things in our leadership role that create an environment in which others can thrive and survive and succeed. And it's doing those things in a way that shows care for others, because you don't create beneficial outcomes unless you have a deep caring for others. So that's a part of keystone leadership. And the legacy of Keystone leadership really is the part that really separates it. And our legacy as leaders is not how much we left behind in terms of how many companies, how many cars, how many vehicles, how many homes, whatever. Our legacy is what will we be remembered for? What is it that we left behind that was such a mark and that touched people in such a way that long after we are gone, they still remember what we stood for? And they still remember, putting it back in the context of the bush, what tracks did we leave? What footprints did we leave for others to follow? So that's really the in a nutshell, that's the context of Keystone leadership.
Well, thank you for that, Hugh. That's just a terrific explanation. It's a great concept. It's a great way to look at leadership, isn't it? And
Yeah.
you know, we're unfortunately we're going to have to wrap up now. But just before we do, I want to thank everybody who's on the call with us and watching this interview with Hugh Coppen. And Hugh, I want to just end with this comment. You know, you epitomize for me what Keystone leadership is all about. I mean, you are inspirational. You inspire me. I know you inspire a lot of other people. You're a man of purpose, and you're making an impact. There's no question you're making an impact. So I want to thank you very much for being with us. It's always great being with you, but I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. Nice seeing you.
Okay. Yeah, great seeing you.
Bye.
Bye now.
Okay.